are wonderful in traffic jams and on runs, but for anyone on a holiday trip, an enthralling podcast can be an excellent travel companion. As 2023 comes to a close, we take a look at, or better yet, a listen to, some of the most engaging, enlightening, and entertaining podcasts of the past year. Nicholas Quah is a podcast critic for Vulture, and Sarah Larson is a staff writer for The New Yorker and pens the column Podcast Department. All right, Nick, let's start right away with one of your favorites, a podcast called The Retrievals from Serial Productions. This is about a fertility clinic at Yale, where it turns out women who went into for procedures, being told they were receiving pain medication, were not getting it at all. Instead, it was being stolen by a nurse. Let's listen to a clip from that.
The women are seeking fertility treatment for a variety of reasons. They've had a couple miscarriages, and they're pushing 40. They don't have fallopian tubes, or they need sperm. All of them wind up at the fertility clinic at Yale University. They meet their doctors, get the info, start giving themselves the shots. And eventually they get to the day they've been waiting for, the day of the first egg retrieval.
Nick, there's a lot of nonfiction stories out there. What stood out about this podcast?
What stood out to me is the choices that it made, which tended to be a lot more quiet, a lot more 30,000-foot views. Susan Burton, who leads this show, kind of brings us to more thornier layers of the story. In particular, she sort of examines the tension of how the sort of structural dismissal of women's pain kind of knows no class, no institutional affiliation. Many of the women who are affected are affiliated with Yale University. Some of them are academics. Some of them study pain for a living. You know, it's a very kind of complex story in the sense of it gets to some really, really tricky territory, like the tension between a woman's motherhood and their bodily autonomy.
So I want to ask about one of your favorites. This is a podcast called Articles of Interest, which bills itself as being about what we wear, but it's really about so much more, including society. I want to play a clip from an episode that focuses on a fabric pattern, a pattern that many know as paisley.
The reason why paisley is called paisley. The reason why Prince's estate is called Paisley Park. The reason why John Lennon painted paisleys all over his Rolls Royce. Upends everything I thought I knew about how knockoffs worked and the role of the Indian diaspora in American history.
I, for one, didn't know that about John Lennon. What do you love about this podcast?
Sounds like quite a car. The thing I always love about this podcast, which is perennially great, is that Avery Trufelman, the creator, who pretty much does everything on the podcast, brings us into a world of talking about clothing and the history of fashion and design and style, topics I frankly don't think of myself as really being interested in, and shows their connections to history and colonialism and all these rich stories. I'm always surprised, I'm always delighted, and it's substantive without feeling like a bummer.
You both know that podcasts have clearly exploded in the last decade, and one reason is a particular genre, true crime, often sort of real death stories, murder, all of that. But Nick, one of your favorite podcasts that's relatively new here is one called Ghost Story that kind of adds new layers to that genre. Tell us about this one.
This is kind of a tricky one to describe because I've taken to describing it as a conceptual turducken in a sense of it's a murder mystery that's stuffed into a family story that's stuffed into a ghost story. It's hosted by a British journalist named Tristan Redmond, and he kind of stumbles into the story through a series of coincidences. In a house that he grew up in London, there was there was some creepy things happening in the bedroom that he occupied at the top floor, and many, many years later, he would sort of hear other stories about stuff happening in this house. And then he would discover that his wife's great-grandmother was killed in a house right next to that building. And so from one rabbit hole to another leads him to this long, discovery and journey around his wife's, family, essentially. It's a really lovely, really surprising piece that's as far away from the luridity of true crime as you can get.
Fantastic. I will say, as we are talking about this right now, obviously we live in very serious times. So Sarah, this is a good time for a serious podcast like Normal Gossip, which is one of the ones that you highlighted in your story on The New Yorker and is not serious at all. But help explain this phenomenon that is this podcast. It is actual gossip about real people.
It's pretty brilliant. It gives you all the pleasure of gossip without the guilt of gossip, basically. So it takes anonymous stories with identifying details changed. And it's just basically about people making crazy decisions and doing interesting things. It's not salacious. It's not mean. It's just basically like listening to a good friend tell a wild story and observe and opine about human behavior without feeling bad about yourself.
Which is probably exactly what we all need right now. Last question quickly before we go. Can you name a podcast that you did not expect to like, but really won you over in the last year?
That would definitely be Think Twice, Michael Jackson by Leon Neyfakh and his co-host Jay Smooth. I was really apprehensive about a Michael Jackson podcast and kind of dreading it. And then when I listened to it, it was beautifully done, incredibly nuanced and interesting. It wasn't trying to prove him guilty or not guilty. It was just taking the whole story of his whole life presented alongside the context. It's just wonderfully evoked and turned out to be really enjoyable.
Nick?
I'm wondering if I could say this on public television, but there's a show that I was not expecting to like called A Murder on Sex Island. It's basically an audiobook written by a comedian. Her name is Jo Firestone. A couple of months ago, I think she just sort of sat down and said, I wanted to learn how to write a murder mystery. And she wrote a murder mystery and she decided to distribute it as a podcast. It follows a private eye who is conscripted to investigate a murder on a reality show while being on a reality show. It's one of my favorite things that I heard this year. It's such a joy.
All right, I have a lot of listening to do. Thanks to both of you. Nick and Sarah, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.